Welcome back to another tabletop review. Today we'll be comparing 5 pocket guns. The purpose of this review is to consider the options that these pocket guns offer compared to each other. I've already done more in-depth individual discussions on each of these guns in previous videos, so check those out if you're interested. My personal criteria for selection included that the gun be very small in size, the smaller the better, and that it be very lightweight. It needs to be comfortable to carry. In fact, it needs to be something that I actually have comfortably concealed carry in my own pocket more than one time. It needs to be very snag-free in design, and it should be .32 caliber or larger. Again, these were just my personal standards for this comparison. As a result, I've selected the Seecamp 32, the Ruger LCP 380, the Beretta Tomcat 32, the Kimber Micro Carry 380, and the Smith & Wesson 438 Special Revolver. First of all, why these? Why didn't I include the Car CW 380 or the Car PM9 or the Smith & Wesson MMP Bodyguard or the Colt Mustang XSP or the SIG 365 or the SIG P238? And I know that there are many of you out there who are absolutely convinced that I've committed a mortal sin here by not including the Glock 42 in this list. I beg your forgiveness, but heck, there are probably many more guns that I should have included, and I can't tell you how sad I am that I don't have a SIG 365 here. But to be honest, it's simply because these are the ones I have. Also, why not include the Walther CCP, which I do have, and which has been described as a pocket pistol. Great gun, but in my opinion, it's just a little too big and a little too heavy as a pocket carry, as is the Walther PPKS, which I do have right here. So let me just point out that there are sharp edges on this pistol. And in addition, its weight at 26.6 ounces, it is considerably heavy than anything else on the table here. In fact, in comparison to size, it does match. In fact, it may be a little bit smaller than the Smith & Wesson revolver. But the Smith & Wesson revolver is only 17.5 ounces loaded. That's a big difference when it comes to trying to carry this in your pocket compared to this one. I certainly agree that all these others should receive honorable mention, and I just did that. So let's just move on. First, let's make sure that all these guns are cleared. And actually, I did do that earlier, but we'll quickly do that here. Okay, everything's been visually and physically inspected. All are cleared. And remember, I have personally carried each of these pocket guns. It's my experiences that I'm expressing. Others may have very different experiences. I can only express mine. So let's begin with the Seecamp LWS32. I'm going to bring a scale over here. We'll turn it on, place the Seecamp on it. The Seecamp carries 6+1 rounds. So we'll place the rounds on the scale. I do carry the 7th round in the chamber, so to be fair, then I come up with 13.25 ounces. That is a 2-inch barrel, and it's double action only. The Ruger LCP 380, 6+1 rounds, 2.75 inch barrel, weighs only 12.65 ounces, double actions only. The Beretta Tomcat 32, 6+1 rounds, 2.4 inch barrel, weighs 16 ounces even, single and double action. The Kimber Micro Carry 380, 7+1 rounds, 2.7 inch barrel, weighs in at 17.35 ounces, double action only. finally, we have the Smith & Wesson 438 38 Special Plus P revolver. 5 shots, 1.7-inch barrel, 17.3 ounces, double action, single action. And all of these are considered pocket guns. But whose pocket? Like the term compact, this is sometimes just a manufacturer's designation between their own lines of gun. Also, let me just say that if you're watching this and really are trying to decide the best pocket gun out there, please take time to look at those other ones I mentioned earlier that aren't included here today. They really are good alternatives too. Yes, even the Glock 42 if you must. But hopefully what I'm about to do will provide you with a bit of guide of what to look for. I admit that this is strictly subjective. There's nothing scientific about what I'm about to do here. In fact, if I were to repeat this in a week, it would probably change. But let's try it anyway and see what happens. So I tried to come up with a methodology that would best summarize my thinking about pocket carry. And I came up with 8 measures. I actually thought it was best to weight these measures a little bit differently by importance as well. And again, these are just my opinion. You could come up with different measures and you might place a different level of importance on each of these measures as well. So in order, they are concealability at 20, ease of carry also at 20. I consider those to be highly important. What's the point of a pocket pistol if you can't conceal it and you can't carry it? Accuracy is certainly very important. That gets a score of 15 total possibly. Firing experience 10, maintenance 10, reliability 10, aesthetics. Aesthetics is whether I think it's an attractive piece or not, and value 10. So as you can see, we got a total of 100. So let's go through the process here. So we're going to begin with the Seecamp. And the method that I used for measuring concealability was actually a function of what I consider to be one of those important measures, and that was rough volume. So I took the height, the length, and the thickness and basically determined the rough volume of each one of the weapons here. Plus I also needed to derive it based on a base score of 20. And so to do that, I essentially started with a score of 50, and I subtracted the height times the weight times the thickness from that score of 50, and then I divided that in half. That would give me a score roughly in that range of about 20. And so when I did that for the Seecamp, which was 3.5 inches in height, 4.2 in length, and has a width of about 1.9 inches, I came up with a score of 36.8. Divide that in half, and I have a score of 18. And so I continued on with the same measurements on the rest of these guns, and basically came up with this summary. For the Ruger LCP 380, I came up with a final score of concealability of 17. For the Beretta Tomcat, a score of 15. For the Kimber Micro Carry, a score of 11. And for the Smith & Wesson Model 438, a score of 4. Now when you look at these scores, and they're, again, the concealability scores, and they're based on the function of rough volume, it sort of makes sense, because as you look at all of them, you can determine that the Smith & Wesson in this display of these guns is the largest of the ones sitting here. And you can see that the smallest is the Seecamp. So these scores seem to reflect those differences. The next measure is the measure of ease of carry. Well, again, I had to come up with a way to sort of measure that and calculate it, quantify it, if you will. I determined that ease of carry, at least as I looked at it, was a function of bulk and weight, and its fit and how easy it was to draw. So really I had 2 measures that I had to calculate. One of them I could readily do by the weight of the individual gun. And if you remember earlier, we did measure the weight of each and every one of these. Then I had to really try out drawing these out of their holsters in a pocket carry situation and determine which ones seemed to be easier or more difficult. And based on that, I came up with the following formula. So for me, ease of carry seemed to be reflected best in a base score of 20 less the loaded weight. And remember, I had to determine the weight based on the way that these were all carried, and that was fully loaded. And then another measure, which what I would determine to be its a fitness as it related to its ease for drawing. Now, that was just sort of a rating I had to come up with. That would give me a total ease of carry score. So 20 minus 13.25 ounces for the Seecamp gave us 6.75. Rounded out, that would just be 7. Plus, I had to come up with a, I guess what you might call a fit and draw score. Well, the Seecamp for me was one of the easiest ones to carry and to be able to draw out of its holster in a pocket carry situation. I gave it a rating of 10. So 10 plus 7 was 17. So the overall score of ease of carry for the Seecamp for my determination was 17. And so I continued that on for the rest of these guns. And an interesting thing happened as I was putting together the Fit for Draw personal rating. I actually took each one of these, put it in a holster, and I tried to compare it on that measure of fitness and draw and so forth. And I got to tell you, although the Seecamp was superb in that regard, the others were extremely good. Even the Smith & Wesson 438, no problems really with all of them. There was just a slight difference between them. So as you'll notice, the Fit for Draw additional score that I gave each of these is only slightly different. They're all rated fairly high. When it came to the weight, those differences are reflected in the outcomes here. So again, for the Seecamp, we have a final score of 17. For the Ruger, which it really was very, very good, it's almost comparable to the Seecamp. Only a difference of 1 point, has a total score of 16. For the Beretta Tomcat, and this is because the Beretta is just a little heavier, ends up with a score of 13. But notice that the Fit for Draw score is still at a 9, equal with the Ruger. The Kimber Micro Carry, also Fit for Draw score 9, but because of its weight, it ends up with a score of 3. The two combined gives us a score of 12. Smith & Wesson 438, even there, fitness for draw was still an 8. It was really not too bad. And of course, because of its size, it ends up with a score of 11. So there are my ease of carry scores. It may not be very scientific, and you may have some arguments about the way that I calculated these, but again, based on a raw score of total of 20, these scores seem to reflect fairly well what I believe are true statements about that, what I feel is the ease of carry for each and every one of these. On the question of accuracy, I decided that a good measure of accuracy was drawing from the holster. I would load 3 times, 5 shots each, under rapid fire conditions, 12 feet distance from an 8-inch target. I thought that best simulated a more likely or real-world type of condition for a pocket pistol's use. I was most successful with the Kimber Micro Carry, so I'll show that to you first. And as you can see, I had 14 successful placements. So the score for the Kimber Micro Carry 380 was 14. The Seecamp I did fairly well with, a score of total of 12. The Ruger LCP score total 13. The Beretta Tomcat 32, I could have done a little better with it, but while I was firing it, that thing that happens to me frequently is the slide bit me in the back of the hand, and it kind of set me off a little bit. So my score was only 12. The Kimber Micro Carry again was 14, and the Smith & Wesson Model 438, again a little hard to control. Once I got it under control there, I did fairly well, but a score of 11. So not too bad actually for all of them under those conditions. The next measure was the measure of firing experience, and that was just overall what it was like to fire these guns. And actually, the Seecamp is, although it's small, it is only a .32 caliber, so it actually is fairly comfortable. I gave it a score of 8. The Ruger, with that trigger and the fact that it's thin and also just kicks a bit for me, it got a score of 6. The Beretta Bobcat, great feel, actually very comfortable to fire. The fact that it hits me back here when I fire it sometimes caused me to ding it, and so score was a 7. Kimber Micro Carry, absolutely just a fantastic firing experience, got to be a 10. The Smith & Wesson, there is a kick to firing the Smith & Wesson, and so its score is a 5. On the score of maintenance, actually these guns all are, in my opinion, not that difficult to break down and clean and so forth. So I had to be kind of tough a bit on my assessment of maintenance. On the Seecamp, I gave it a score of 6 because there is some difficulty in just manipulating the slide for removal. It's really not that difficult, but I know a lot of people struggle with it, so I gave it a score of 6. It probably is the lowest score of all of these guns. On the Ruger is fairly simple. The removal of the pin here, removal of the slide, fairly simple, not too bad. Actually, fairly easy, but I could only score it a 7 just because, I don't know, I just kind of felt like it took a little bit more than I thought it should in order to give it a higher score. The Beretta Tomcat, for example, is much easier to disassemble, pulling up the barrel, and then the removal of the slide is so much easier. So I had to give it a little higher score of 8. The Kimber, if you're familiar with breaking down a 1911, then you're probably pretty comfortable with breaking this pistol down. However, some people struggle with it, and I do admit that initially I did struggle a little bit. It does take a little bit more to disassemble. So the score for the Kimber was a 7. The Smith & Wesson, that's it, and it's back together. So score of a 10. On the measure of reliability, all of these, for the most part, have been pretty good performers for me. I've had really no problems with them except for the Ruger LCP. I've had some failure to eject when firing this pistol, and that kind of something is hard for me to forget. It's not a serious problem. It might be just a question of the loads of the bolts that I was using at the time, but nonetheless, that is something that makes it different from the rest of these guns. And so they all get a 10 except for the Ruger that got a score of 8. On the question of aesthetics, again, aesthetics is just what I think about these guns, how they sort of appeal to me or not. I really love the Seecamp. It's just such a beautifully made pistol. It's so well made, so well finished. It's just very attractive. It has quite an appeal for me. I like this pistol. I like carrying it, and so I would give it a 5. The Ruger, not so much so. It's just sort of a plain Jane to me. It's kind of common. The crimson trace laser sights on it kind of spices it up a little bit, but for the most part, it's kind of common. So I had to rate it about a 3. The Beretta Tomcat, this to me is a really awesome pistol. It's got an outstanding feel to it. It's like that mini Beretta 92, and so it just got that appeal in the way of the looks and it feels. It's got an excellent feel to it. I had to give it aesthetically a pretty good rating. I gave it a 5. Well, it's hard to beat the Kimber. The Kimber Micro Carry is just one of the most fantastic pistols. Excellent feel to it. It feels like a real gun in your hands, and yet at the same time it's a pocket gun. So score of a 5. I got to tell you, there's no doubt about it. There is something about having a snubby, and the Smith & Wesson 438 is indeed that snub-nosed revolver. But with the shielded hammer, it just has a kind of an ugly appearance to it. Now, it's not its fault. It's the way it's designed, and it serves its purpose. It's very practical. It gets the job done. But in terms of how it looks and really kind of how I feel about it, I have it scored a little bit lower. I'd give it a score of 2. The LWS Seecamp on the question of value. And value has to do with whether or not I felt I got a fairly good deal for my money. At $500, that sounds like a lot of money for a .32 caliber pistol, but the manufacturing of this is just outstanding. The finish is excellent. This is an heirloom piece as far as I'm concerned. This is just a fantastic pistol. It was hard to come by. As far as I'm concerned, $500 was a good price for it. The Ruger LCP was also a pretty good value. I gave it a score of 8. It was $249 or $59, I think, at the time. I did pay a little bit more for it because of the Crimson Trace laser system on it. It was a package deal for, I think it was about $300, so it was quite a bargain. But nonetheless, I really felt that given that it was so slim, so small, it met my needs for a pocket pistol. I could easily conceal it, that for that money, for what I got, it was worth it. So at least a score of an 8. The Beretta Tomcat at $485. Again, we're up there. I got a pretty good bargain on this one, but I got to tell you, this is just an outstanding piece. It feels fantastic. It's fun to be on the range with it, except for biting me occasionally. But I had to give it a pretty high rating. I felt that I got a pretty good deal with it, and I would give it a score of 8. What about the Kimber? Well, I'm going to score the Kimber a score of 10 for value. At $600, it's the most expensive of all of these guns, but I think for what I got for my money, actually, this is an outstanding deal. It is more than just a pocket pistol. It feels substantial. Its accuracy is just simply outstanding. Superb sights on it compared to all these others. It gets a score of 10. The Smith & Wesson 438 38 Special retailed at $450. Seems kind of high, but not in the world of revolvers. Actually, I didn't think that was too bad, so it received a rating of 8. All right, so now let's take and summarize all of those scores and see what we get. So I took those scores and I entered them into a spreadsheet, and here's the outcome. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of variation. It'll be interesting to see how they total up and compare. Right now, it looks like there's quite a bit of difference between each of these guns. Well, here are the totals, and the differences are probably not too surprising. The Seecamp comes out ahead with a score of 84. The Kimber next at a score of 79. The Beretta and the Ruger are tied at 78, and the Smith & Wesson at a score of 61. I would say this pretty much reflects the way that I view each of these as a pocket carry. Now, if I'm just judging these individually as guns, not necessarily on the basis of pocket carry, I could come up with a little different score. But that was the measure, and that's what we were talking about. And so I think this does reflect pretty much my view of these guns. Well, I believe that this actually does really reflect my view of the Seecamp overall. I actually find myself carrying the Seecamp more frequently than anything else. Perhaps, as they say in the world of self-defense handguns, the smallest, most discreet pistol usually provides the best carry options. That's certainly why I find myself slipping the Seecamp in my pocket. Truth is, I really am more likely to carry it, but that's just my experience. It also explains why my reluctance to carry the Smith & Wesson revolver. I mean, what it doesn't explain is why I find myself carrying the Kimber as often as I do, rather than the Ruger or the Beretta. Now, maybe it's the aesthetics question. Maybe I should have weighted it more heavily. Whatever, the scores actually seem to reflect overall my experience with these guns. It's important to remember that these were my measures defined by me and judged by me. As I said before, this wasn't a very scientific assessment, and perhaps maybe my measurement techniques were a little complicated. They don't need to be. You can make them relatively simple. This was just my way of going about it. But the process of determining what's important to you when you're selecting a pocket carry gun, or any other gun for that matter, should certainly be included. Weighting the different factors like ease of carry, accuracy, reliability could lead to different outcomes for you than for me, but it doesn't make the questions less relevant. It's worthwhile to take time to at least think about what you expect from a gun and why before you buy. Actually, with the proper training and experience of use, any of these guns would suffice as a good choice as a personal pocket gun, as well as any of the other pocket guns I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I didn't include in this discussion. Yes, again, that includes the Glock 42. Am I forgiven yet? Any weapon you carry is better than the one you left at home. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll be back for my next tabletop review. Until next time, stay safe.